The children screamed when they saw him, not the sharp, startled cry of a child surprised by a stranger. Something worse, something primal. The smallest one, a girl with Hana's wide brown eyes and his own stubborn jaw, buried her face into the chest of a man Kang Jisoo had never seen before. The boy, barely old enough to stand on his own, stumbled backward and grabbed the man's pant leg with both fists. And the third child, the one who looked most like him, the one with the same hard line between her brows that Jisoo saw every morning in the mirror. She didn't cry at all. She just stared, like she was memorizing the face of something dangerous so she could avoid it for the rest of her life. 3 children, his blood, his lineage, the heirs to everything he'd built with bullets and silence, and the kind of loyalty that left bodies buried in concrete, and not one of them knew his name. The man holding them, tall, quiet, built like someone who had fought his way through life without ever needing to raise his voice, stepped slightly to the left, not a retreat, a repositioning, shielding, the way a father shields his children from a threat. Jisoo's throat closed. "You need to leave," the man said. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of calm that only came from someone who had already decided he was willing to die over this. "You're scaring them." Jisoo looked past him, through the small doorway of the modest apartment in a neighborhood he would never have found if his best men hadn't spent 3 months tearing apart paper trails and buried identities. He could see a kitchen counter with 3 sippy cups in a neat row, a refrigerator covered in crayon drawings, a pair of woman's shoes by the door, simple, worn, familiar in a way that made his chest physically ache. Hana's shoes. She wasn't there. But the ghost of her was in every corner of that tiny apartment, in every drawing taped to the wall, in the way the children smelled like shea butter and lavender, the same scent she used to carry on her skin when she'd curl into him at night and whisper, "Come back to me. No matter what, come back." He hadn't come back. He had thrown her out. And now, 9 months later, the most feared man in the Korean underworld stood in a doorway in a neighborhood that didn't even have a doorman, watching his own children cling to another man like he was the only safe place left in the world. Jisoo's hand trembled. He closed it into a fist to make it stop, but the shaking had already reached somewhere deeper, somewhere no fist could fix. "Their names," he said, and his voice cracked on the second word. He hadn't cracked in 15 years, not when his father died, not when he took his first life, not when he built an empire from the ashes of the old one and swore on his bloodline that nothing would ever break him. But this broke him. The man in the doorway didn't answer. He just shifted again, one hand on the boy's head, the other resting on the older girl's shoulder. Steady, practiced. The kind of touch that said he had done this 1,000 times before, soothed them, held them, shown up in the middle of the night when they cried. All the things a father does, all the things Jisoo never got the chance to do. Because 9 months ago, on a night when the rain fell like God himself was trying to wash the blood off the streets of this city, Jisoo had made a choice. And that choice had a name, and the name was Yura, and the cost of believing her was standing right in front of him with 3 small faces that would never call him Appa. This is how it started. Before the rain, before the children, before the lie that burned his life to the ground, there was a man who believed he was untouchable. Kang Jisoo ran the Eastern Syndicate out of a glass tower in downtown Los Angeles, a legitimate real estate firm on paper, a war machine underneath. His name was not spoken in polite company. It was whispered in back rooms, invoked like a warning, a prayer, a curse. He controlled the ports, the clubs, the invisible lines of commerce that kept half the city's underground economy flowing like blood through a vein. His men did not question him. His rivals did not challenge him. His enemies did not survive long enough to become a pattern. He was 34 years old, and he had already buried more men than most people would ever meet. His mornings began the same way. A pressed suit laid across the back of a chair, black coffee with no sugar, and a 7 a.m. briefing from Park Min-ho, his intelligence chief, who had served his father before him and would probably serve the Kang bloodline until the day he died. Min-ho was the only man in the organization allowed to speak without being spoken to first. Even that privilege had limits. Jisoo moved through the world like a man who had swallowed silence and made it his skeleton. He did not shout. He did not threaten in rooms full of people. He simply sat and waited, and when he finally spoke, every man in the room remembered that his stillness was not peace. It was the held breath before the gunfires. But there was one thing about Jisoo that no one in his world could explain. One anomaly in the otherwise ruthless architecture of his life, and her name was Hana. Hana Brooks, before she became Hana Kang, was a 28-year-old physical therapist from Inglewood with a laugh that could fill a room and a silence that could empty one. She was tall, dark-skinned, wore her hair in thick coils that she twisted up when she was working and let fall when she wanted to feel like herself. She had her grandmother's stubbornness, her mother's grace, and a mouth that had gotten her in trouble since she was old enough to talk. She came from a world that had nothing to do with empires. Her grandmother, Ruthie May, had raised her in a 3-bedroom house on Eucalyptus Avenue, the kind of home where Sunday dinner was mandatory, church was optional but encouraged, and you didn't leave the table until you'd eaten everything on your plate and told someone you loved them. Hana had worked her way through USC, survived a clinical residency that nearly broke her, and built a client base that kept her booked 3 months in advance. She didn't need saving. She didn't need a man to define her world. She had done that herself, brick by brick, in a city that didn't hand anything to anyone. She had met Jisoo 3 years before the night that destroyed them, in the least likely place, a laundromat on Crenshaw Boulevard at 2 a.m. His car had broken down. His driver was 20 minutes out, and rather than stand on a dark street in a $3,000 suit, he had walked into the only open building on the block, where a woman in an oversized hoodie and mismatched socks was folding towels and humming Erykah Badu like the rest of the world didn't exist. She hadn't looked up when the door chimed. "We're not open," she'd said without turning. "The sign says 24 hours. The sign is a liar." He had stood there, in the fluorescent light that made everything look washed out and strange. And for the first time in years, he hadn't known what to say, because she hadn't recognized him. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't looked at his suit and calculated what he was worth. She just kept folding her towels, and when she finally turned around and saw him standing there like a man who had wandered into the wrong universe, she had raised one eyebrow and said, "You gonna stand there all night, or you gonna help me fold?" That was the beginning. That was the crack in the armor he didn't know he was wearing. They married 18 months later. Small ceremony. No Empire guests. No alliances sealed at the altar. Just Hana in a white dress that made his chest hurt, his mother's ring on her finger, and a promise he made in Korean because the words felt truer in the language his heart was built in. "Dangsinil jikilge, I will protect you." He had meant it. For a while, he kept the promise. Hana lived in the mansion on the hill, surrounded by guards she pretended she didn't notice, wrapped in a life she hadn't asked for but accepted because she loved him. Not the empire, not the name, not the fear he carried like cologne. Him. The man who peeled tangerines for her when she was tired. The man who pressed his forehead to her belly the night she told him she was pregnant and whispered something so soft even she couldn't hear it. The man who, on their first anniversary, showed up at her grandmother Ruthie May's house in Inglewood with a bottle of soju and a homemade japchae and sat at that dining table with a woman who had never met a Korean man in her life and answered every single question she asked until Ruthie May finally looked at Hana and said, "All right, baby, he'll do." But Jisoo's world did not make room for softness. And the thing about building your life on loyalty is that when someone knows how to counterfeit it, you can't tell the difference until the blade is already in your back. Yura Shin arrived like smoke, slow, invisible, and already everywhere before anyone noticed she was in the room. She was Korean, beautiful in the sharp, curated way that certain women wielded like a weapon. Every feature deliberate, every gesture measured, every silence timed to make a man lean closer. She'd been introduced to Jisoo through a business intermediary, a woman with connections to the old families in Seoul, someone whose presence at his table was meant to smooth a trade route that had been bleeding money for months. That was the cover. The truth was simpler and uglier. Yura had studied Jisoo the way an architect studies a building before demolition. She knew his pressure points. She knew the language of his pride, what fed it, what threatened it, what made it flare like a wound touched too hard. She understood that a man like Jisoo didn't need to be seduced with her body. He needed to be seduced with loyalty, with usefulness, with the intoxicating illusion that someone understood the weight he carried and could help him bear it. She never raised her voice. She never made demands. She simply appeared at meetings, at dinners, at the edges of conversations, where she would offer a single observation, so precise and so useful that Jisoo began to seek her out. She became the counsel he didn't know he was missing, the voice in his ear that said the things his men were too afraid to say. And quietly, so quietly that even Minho didn't see it happening, she began to poison the only good thing in his life. It started small, a comment here, a raised eyebrow there. Hana was asking about the Busan account again, Yura mentioned one evening, pouring his tea with the unhurried grace of a woman who had rehearsed the gesture in her mirror. She seems very interested in the details. Jisoo frowned. She worries, that's all. Of course. Yura's smile was porcelain thin. I just thought you should know. In our world, curiosity has a price. Our world. As if she belonged in it, as if Hana didn't. Jisoo said nothing, but the seed had been planted, and Yura was patient enough to water it with silence. 2 weeks later, Yura found him after a late meeting, the conference room still heavy with cigarette smoke and tension. She sat across from him and tilted her head slightly, like a thought had just occurred to her that she wasn't sure she should share. "Can I be honest with you about something?" she asked. Jisoo looked up. The question itself was the hook, because honesty was the currency he valued most, and she knew it. "Hana has been calling your private line at the office, the one only your lieutenants are supposed to know. She's my wife. She knows the number. She's been calling when you're not here, asking your secretary questions about schedules, shipment dates, personnel changes." Yura paused, letting each detail land like a stone dropped into still water. "I'm sure it's nothing. I'm sure she's just involved." The word involved hung in the air between them, and Yura watched it do its work. She didn't need to say what she meant. The implication lived in the space between the words, and Jisoo's mind, trained to detect threats in the smallest inconsistencies, did the rest. Weeks passed. Hana was 6 months pregnant now, glowing and heavy and moving through the mansion with one hand on her belly and the other reaching for her husband, who was less and less often there to be reached. She noticed the distance. She felt the temperature drop every time she walked into a room where Yura had just been. She noticed the way conversation stopped when she entered, the way Jisoo's phone was always face down on the table now, the way he looked at her sometimes, not with love but with assessment, like she was being evaluated. She asked once carefully, the way you test ice before stepping onto it. "Who is she to you, Jisoo?" He didn't look up from his phone. "She's business. Business doesn't look at you like that." "Like what?" "Like she already owns you." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Jisoo's jaw tightened, not because Hana was wrong, but because her instinct, her sharp and inconvenient instinct, sounded too much like the very accusation Yura had been feeding him in reverse. If Hana was watching Yura this closely, what else was she watching? "You don't know anything about my business," he said quietly, and the way he said it, flat, final, like a door closing, told Hana everything she needed to know about how far the distance between them had already grown. She turned away from him and pressed her palm to her belly, where the baby kicked, as if in protest. "I know more than you think," she whispered. But she wasn't talking about his business. She was talking about his heart, and they both knew it. That was the knife's edge Yura had been sharpening all along. She didn't need Jisoo to love her. She needed him to doubt Hana. The sabotage came in stages. First, a shipment was intercepted, a container of electronics that served as the financial backbone of a deal with a syndicate in Tokyo. $3 million evaporated overnight. Jisoo's men swept the operation, searched for leaks, interrogated everyone who had touched the logistics chain. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. The leak hadn't come from inside his operation. It had come from Yura, who had passed the shipping manifest to a rival family through a chain of intermediaries so clean it would take a forensic accountant 6 months to trace. And by then, the damage would already be done. Then the second hit. A warehouse in Long Beach, raided by a crew that knew exactly where the security gaps were, exactly when the rotation changed, exactly which door had a faulty lock. They took everything. Product, cash reserves, documents that should never have existed outside of Jisoo's private safe. 2 of his men disappeared that same night, not arrested, not hiding, just gone. Jisoo paced his office at 3 a.m. The city spread below him like a circuit board of lights and lies. Someone was inside his walls, someone with access, someone who knew things only a handful of people knew. The paranoia that had always been his sharpest tool was now turning on him, eating through his logic like acid, and Yura fed it the way you feed a fire. Carefully, steadily, with just enough air to keep it burning without blowing it out. And then she sat across from him, legs crossed, expression grave, and placed a phone on the table between them. "I didn't want to show you this," she said softly, "but I can't protect you if I'm not honest." The phone showed text messages, Hana's number, communications that appeared to be exchanges with an unknown contact, timestamps, coordinates, references to shipments and schedules, the kind of information that, if real, would mean his wife had been selling him to his enemies while carrying his child. Jisoo stared at the screen. His blood moved like ice water. "This could be fabricated," he said, but his voice had already changed. The warmth was gone. The man who peeled tangerines was gone. "It could," Yura agreed, "but can you afford the chance? If she's compromised, everyone around you is in danger. Your men, your empire." She paused, and her next words were almost a whisper. "Your child." She knew exactly what she was doing. She had watched him build his identity around one principle: protect what is yours at any cost. And she had turned that principle into a weapon aimed directly at the woman he loved. Jisoo did not confront Hana with the evidence. He didn't ask her to explain. He didn't call in his intelligence team to verify the messages, trace the contacts, or run the kind of deep audit that would have exposed Yura's entire operation in 48 hours. He didn't do any of that, because Yura had already taught him that hesitation was weakness, and weakness in his world got people killed. He made his decision the way he made all decisions, swiftly, coldly, and with the terrifying certainty of a man who believed he was always right. The storm that night was biblical. Rain fell in sheets so thick the city looked like it was drowning. Thunder cracked across the sky like something ancient was splitting apart. The mansion on the hill glowed from the inside, warm and gold, and Hana was in the kitchen making tteokguk because Jisoo once told her it was his mother's recipe, and it tasted like home. She had learned to make it the way his mother did, with hand-cut rice cakes and a broth that simmered for hours. And she had done it not because she was trying to be Korean, but because she was trying to love him in a language he understood. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. Heavy. Wrong. The rhythm of a man walking towards something he'd already decided to destroy. He stood in the doorway, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled. His face was a mask she didn't recognize. Not the cold he showed the world, but something worse. Cold she had never been on the receiving end of. Cold that was meant for enemies. Jisoo. She set down the ladle. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. 8 months now. She could feel the baby shift, restless, as if it could sense what was coming. "Get out!" The words didn't make sense. She blinked, searching his face for the punchline, for the crack in the mask, for the man she married. "What?" "Get out of my house." His voice was level, terrifyingly level, like a surgeon describing an incision. "Take nothing. Speak to no one. And if you contact anyone connected to me, anyone, I will treat you the way I treat every traitor who has ever betrayed this family." Hana's legs went weak. She grabbed the edge of the counter. "Jisoo, what are you talking about? What traitor? I would never." "Don't." The single word was a door slamming shut. "I've seen the proof." "What proof? Proof of what?" Her voice was rising now, cracking at the edges, because the man in front of her looked like a stranger wearing her husband's face. "I have done nothing. I have given you everything. My life, my safety, my peace, my body. You gave my enemies everything they needed to destroy me." He stepped closer. Not a lover's step, a predator's. "You think I wouldn't find out? You think because you carry my child, I wouldn't—" "Your child." She pressed both hands to her belly. Tears were falling now, hot and fast, and she hated herself for letting him see them. "This is your child, Jisoo. Whatever someone told you, whatever lies you're holding on to instead of asking me, this is your child and I am your wife. And you are standing here, treating me like I'm your enemy, when the real enemy is in the next room waiting for me to leave so she can take my place." The words hit something. She could see it. A flicker behind his eyes, a micro fracture in the mask. For 1 second, 1 breath, the real Jisoo surfaced. The one who used to trace the line of her jaw while she slept. The one who whispered sarangi into her hair when he thought she couldn't hear. Then it was gone. Yura's voice was louder than memory. Paranoia was louder than love. "You are nothing," he said. The words hit the air like a gunshot. "You are nothing to me anymore. Naga, get out." Behind him, at the far end of the hallway, a shadow moved. Yura. Watching from the doorway of the study, her face composed, her eyes bright with something that looked almost like satisfaction. Hana saw her, and in that moment, with the rain hammering the windows and the baby pressing against her ribs and her husband looking at her like she was garbage to be disposed of, Hana understood. She understood all of it. The distance, the coldness, the questions that stopped being questions and became accusations. She understood who had been whispering, who had been shaping, who had been slowly and methodically replacing her in her own home. But she didn't scream. She didn't lunge. She didn't beg. Hannah Brooks had grown up on the south side of Inglewood with a grandmother who raised 6 children alone and never once asked a man to save her. She'd walked through a world that told her she was too dark, too loud, too much. And she had walked through it with her chin up and her back straight and her heart intact. She was not going to shatter on the floor of a mansion that had never really been hers. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She straightened her spine, and she looked at Jisoo, really looked at him, the way you look at something you once loved before you let it go forever. "You didn't throw away just me tonight," she said. Her voice was quiet now, steady, the way a voice gets when it's carrying the weight of a final truth. "You threw away your own blood." Jisoo flinched. It was small, barely a twitch at the corner of his eye, but it was there, and it was the last honest thing his body did before pride sealed it shut again. Hana walked out. No coat, no shoes, no phone, no money. 8 months pregnant, stepping into a storm that soaked her to the bone in seconds. The mansion doors closed behind her. Inside, Yura's heels clicked softly on the marble floor as she moved into the space Hana had left behind. She picked up the ladle Hana had set down. She poured the tiukguk into the sink. She smiled. Outside, a woman who had nothing left but her dignity and the life growing inside her walked down the long driveway, through the iron gates, and into the rain. She did not look back. The first person to find her was a stranger. Daniel Cho was driving home from a late shift at a community clinic in Koreatown. He was a paramedic, former military, the kind of man who moved through the world with the quiet competence of someone who had already survived the worst things a body could survive. He almost didn't see her. The rain was so heavy the road looked like a river, and his wipers were barely keeping up. But something, instinct, luck, God, whatever name you gave to the thing that intervenes when the universe owes someone a mercy, made him slow down at the intersection of Wilshire and Commonwealth. She was sitting on the curb, soaked, shivering, both arms wrapped around her belly like she was trying to hold the world together with her body. Daniel pulled over. He didn't ask questions. He didn't ask who she was, whose wife she was, what kingdom she'd fallen from. He just took off his jacket, draped it over her shoulders, and said, "Can you walk?" She nodded. "Then let's get you warm." He brought her to the clinic. He dried her off. He checked her vitals with the careful, impersonal touch of a man trained to treat the wound before asking how it happened. Her blood pressure was dangerously high. The baby's heart rate was irregular. He looked at her over the top of his stethoscope and said, "You need a hospital." "No hospital." Her voice was raw. "He'll find me." Daniel didn't ask who. He just nodded, pulled out his phone, and called a colleague, an OB-GYN who owed him a favor and didn't ask questions. Over the next 4 weeks, Daniel became the only tether between Hannah and survival. He found her a small apartment above a bakery in a neighborhood where nobody cared about last names. He helped her create a new identity. Nothing criminal, just quiet. The kind of paperwork that let a woman disappear without technically breaking the law. He drove her to every prenatal appointment. He stocked her fridge with the foods her body craved. Mangoes, ginger tea, the coconut rice her grandmother used to make. He assembled a crib at 2 a.m. because she couldn't sleep, and neither could he. And working with his hands was the only way he knew how to say, "I'm here," without overstepping. He never touched her. He never assumed. He never looked at her with anything that asked for more than she was willing to give. He was simply present. A wall between her and the storm she'd walked out of. When she went into labor 5 weeks early, it was Daniel who drove 90 miles per hour down the 10 freeway at midnight. It was Daniel who held her hand through 36 hours of complications that nearly killed her. Bleeding, a cord wrapped too tight, a moment when the monitors screamed and the doctors moved with a speed that told him they were losing her. And when the doctors told her there were three heartbeats, 3 tiny bodies, 3 lives she had carried without knowing, it was Daniel who stood in the hallway with his back against the wall and his hands shaking and tears on his face because he understood that what he was witnessing was the most extraordinary act of survival he had ever seen. Triplets, 2 girls and a boy, all small, all fighters, all alive. Hannah named them herself, Soo-ah, after the Korean word for excellence, because they had already exceeded every odd. Miles, because her grandmother always said a man should carry distance in his name so the world knows he's going places. And Ivy, because it grows where nothing else can. Daniel did not name them. He had no right, and he knew it. But when Soo-ah wrapped her tiny hand around his finger in the NICU, he made a quiet promise that he would spend the rest of his life making sure these children never felt the kind of cold their mother had walked through to bring them here. And he kept that promise. For 9 months, while Jisoo ruled his empire with Yura seated beside him, like a queen who had won her throne through poison, Daniel built a life that required no throne at all. He read bedtime stories in 2 languages. He learned to braid Ivy's hair because Hannah's hands were full with 2 other children, and he watched YouTube tutorials at midnight until he could do a passable twist out that made Hannah laugh for the first time in months. He taught Miles to say Appa, and when the word came out, bright and trusting and aimed directly at him, he looked at Hannah with something broken in his eyes, and she nodded because what else could she do? The man who earned the title was the man who showed up. 9 months after the night he destroyed his family, Kang Jisoo sat alone in his office and stared at a wall. On the surface, the empire appeared intact. The money still flowed, the men still obeyed, the city still whispered his name with the proper mixture of fear and reverence. But beneath the surface, the architecture was rotting. Deals were failing in ways that defied explanation. Information was leaking from somewhere so deep inside his operation that his security chief had started sleeping with a gun under his pillow. 2 more men had vanished, not killed by rivals, but simply gone, as if the ground had opened and swallowed them. And Yura, ever-present, ever-composed Yura, had an explanation for every failure, a convenient scapegoat for every loss, a reassuring word for every wound that never quite healed. "These things happen," she said, smoothing the collar of his shirt like a wife would, like Hana used to. "The important thing is that you're still standing." But Jisoo wasn't sleeping, hadn't slept properly in months. He dreamed of rain. He dreamed of a voice saying words he had refused to hear. "You threw away your own blood." He woke with his hands in fists and his heart racing and the taste of something metallic on his tongue that he was beginning to recognize as guilt. The kitchen still smelled faintly of broth some mornings, a phantom scent that shouldn't have survived 9 months of different meals and different hands cooking them. But every time he walked through it, he felt Hana, not as a memory, as an absence, the kind that takes up more space than a presence ever did. The rumor reached him on a Tuesday. Park Min-ho, the only man in his organization old enough to remember Jisoo's father and loyal enough to speak without being spoken to, walked into his office, set a sealed envelope on the desk, and said, "She's alive, and there's more." Jisoo opened the envelope with hands that had not trembled since the night he lost his children's first breath. Inside was a report, clinical, thorough, the kind of document that left no room for hope or denial. Subject, Hana Brooks, Kang. Status, alive. Location, East Los Angeles, residence listed under alias. Notes, delivered 3 live infants approximately 9 months prior at a private facility. 2 female, 1 male. All healthy. Currently residing with one Daniel Cho, former military paramedic, no known criminal affiliations. 3. The number hit him like a hollow point round. 3 children, his children, alive. Born into the world while he sat in his tower and let another woman pour his tea and empty his soul. He read the report again, and again, and a 4th time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. Triplets. His bloodline. The legacy his father had told him to protect above all else. The dynasty that was supposed to carry the Kang name into the next generation had been born in a clinic on the east side of the city while Yura measured curtains for the bedroom that used to be Hana's. Minho watched his boss's face and saw something he had never seen in 30 years, the beginning of total collapse. "Find them," Jisoo whispered. "Find them now." It took 3 weeks. Hana had been meticulous in her disappearance. Different name, different neighborhood, cash economy, no digital footprint. The kind of vanishing act that required either professional help or the survival instinct of a woman who knew exactly what her husband was capable of. When his men finally located the apartment, a modest 2-bedroom above a bakery in Boyle Heights, Jisoo went alone. No guards, no weapons, no entourage. For the first time in his adult life, he walked into a situation with nothing but himself, and for the first time, he understood how terrifyingly little that was. And then the door opened, and then Daniel stepped into the frame, and then the children screamed. He stood in that doorway and time collapsed, and he was right back at the beginning of this story. His children clinging to another man, his daughter staring at him like he was the monster under the bed, his son crying into a shoulder that wasn't his, and the smallest one, Ivy, burrowed so deep into Daniel's arms that she had disappeared entirely, as if she could make the stranger at the door go away by refusing to see him. "Please," Jisoo said. The word was foreign in his mouth. He hadn't used it in years, maybe decades. "I just want to see them." Daniel didn't move. "You had your chance to see them. You chose not to." "I didn't know. I didn't know there were 3. You didn't know because you didn't ask. Daniel's voice was steady and unforgiving. You threw a pregnant woman into a rainstorm because someone told you she was the enemy. You didn't investigate. You didn't question. You didn't call her name one time to ask if the lies you were swallowing were even true. You just decided that your paranoia mattered more than her life and their lives, and you acted like a man who doesn't deserve to know their names. The words were precise, surgical. The kind of words that left no wound to bandage because they cut all the way through. Jisoo said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Behind Daniel, the apartment was warm and small and full of the kind of mess that only comes from a house where children are loved. Toys on the floor, drawings on the fridge, a stack of board books on the coffee table, a pair of tiny sneakers lined up next to Daniel's boots by the door. It was everything the mansion on the hill was not. It was a home, and he was not welcome in it. The truth about Yura didn't come all at once. It came the way all truths come when they've been buried under pride. Slowly, then all at once. Then with a violence that left nothing standing. Park Min-ho had been suspicious for months, not of Hana. He had never believed the accusations, never trusted the evidence, never stopped asking the questions Jisoo refused to hear. But he was old school. He served his boss, not his own judgment. So he had waited and watched. And when Jisoo finally broke open the door to doubt, Min-ho walked through it with 6 months of quietly gathered evidence. The text messages on the phone Yura had shown Jisoo, fabricated, created using a cloned SIM card and routed through a server in Taipei that Min-ho traced back to an associate of the Yoon family, Jisoo's primary rivals. The warehouse raid, coordinated using security schedules that only someone with access to Jisoo's private server could have obtained. Yura had that access. Hana never did. The Tokyo shipment, intercepted using a manifest that had been forwarded from Yura's personal phone to a burner number registered under a name that didn't exist. And the men who had disappeared? They hadn't been killed. They had been relocated, paid off by Yura, and absorbed into the Yoon family's operation as part of a long-term strategy to hollow out Jisoo's empire from the inside, while he was too blinded by manufactured suspicion to see the real enemy sitting across his dinner table. Min-ho laid it all out on the desk, document by document, like a prosecutor building a case for a jury of one. And when it was done, when the entire architecture of Yura's deception was spread before him in black and white, Jisoo sat in his chair and did not move for a very long time. He had built his empire on one principle: trust no one, but protect what is yours. And the woman he should have protected was gone. The children he should have held were afraid of him. The life he should have had was playing out in a 2-bedroom apartment with another man at the center of it. And the woman who had stolen it all was still sleeping in his house, still drinking from his cups, still wearing the confidence of a woman who believed she had won. Jisoo stood up. He straightened his cuffs. He looked at Min-ho and said 2 words in Korean, "Kuneja." Let's finish this. What happened to Yura was not violent. Jisoo was not that kind of reckless, not anymore, not after what recklessness had already cost him. There was no confrontation, no dramatic unmasking. He simply had Min-ho deliver a single envelope to her room while she slept, containing every piece of evidence, every traced communication, every lie documented and annotated with the clinical precision of a man who had once trusted her with the architecture of his life. Alongside it was a one-way plane ticket to Seoul and a handwritten note in Jisoo's own hand. "You made me destroy the only real thing I ever had. There is no punishment I can give you that is worse than what I've done to myself. But I never want to see your face again. If I do, I won't be this generous." Yura was gone by morning. The mansion felt like a mausoleum. Every room echoed. Every hallway stretched longer than it should have. The kitchen still smelled faintly of tteokguk, a ghost of the last meal Hana had tried to make him. And Jisoo stood in the doorway of that kitchen at 3 a.m, and finally, for the first time since the night he threw his wife into the rain, he broke. Not the controlled fracture of a man managing his pain, not the silent stoicism of a leader absorbing a loss. He broke completely. His back hit the wall and he slid to the floor and he pressed his hands over his face, and the sound that came out of him was so raw, so deep, so animal that the guard posted outside the door took a step forward before thinking better of it. He cried for the woman who had folded his laundry and hummed Erykah Badu and loved him before the money. He cried for the children who had his eyes and his blood and another man's name on their lips. He cried for the version of himself that had peeled tangerines and whispered promises in Korean and believed, truly believed, that loving someone was the same as being worthy of them. And when the tears stopped, which took longer than he expected, he sat on the cold marble floor and understood the one truth his empire had never taught him. Power could build kingdoms. Power could topple enemies. Power could make an entire city bow. But power could not make a child reach for you instead of the man who had held her first. Power could not erase the memory of rain on a pregnant woman's face. Power could not undo a single word spoken in anger on the worst night of someone's life. Jisoo didn't go back to the apartment in Boyle Heights. He didn't send men. He didn't make demands. He didn't invoke his rights as a father or threaten legal wars or show up with the kind of leverage that men in his position used when they wanted to reclaim what they believed was theirs. Instead, he did something he had never done before. He waited. He waited, and he sent a letter. Not through his men, not through a lawyer, but by his own hand, dropped into a mailbox on a street corner like an ordinary man with ordinary hopes. It was addressed to Hana, and it said, "I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know what I did. I know what I chose. I know that the man who is raising our children earned something I threw away, and I know that earning it back may not be possible. But I want you to know that I see now. I see what I destroyed, and I will spend the rest of my life standing at whatever distance you need for as long as it takes until you decide whether I deserve to know them. Not as their father. I lost that right. But as someone who wants to be worthy of the name, even if they never give it to me." He signed it with his Korean name, the one she used to whisper in the dark. Hana read the letter at the kitchen table while Daniel put the kids to bed. She could hear him through the thin walls, his low voice doing the silly monster growl that made Miles shriek with laughter, the gentle hum he used to settle Ivy, the quiet Korean lullaby he sang for Soo-ah because Hana had once mentioned that Jisoo's mother used to sing it. Daniel had found the lyrics online and learned them phonetically, imperfectly, and Soo-ah didn't care because love doesn't need perfect pronunciation. Hana read the letter twice. She folded it carefully and pressed it to her chest and closed her eyes. She did not cry. She had spent all her tears on the night he threw her away, and she had sworn on her grandmother's memory that she would never waste another one on a man who chose paranoia over love. But she kept the letter. She tucked it into the drawer beside the ultrasound photos she'd carried out of the mansion in her pocket. The only thing she'd taken from that life. The pictures of 3 tiny heartbeats that Jisoo had never seen, the proof that even on the worst night of her life, she had been carrying a miracle. Outside the apartment, the Los Angeles sky was doing what it does best, burning orange and gold at the edges, turning the smog into something that almost looked like beauty. The children were asleep. Daniel was humming something low in the hallway, and Hana sat alone in her kitchen, in a life she had rebuilt with her bare hands, and allowed herself one small, fragile, almost imperceptible thought. Maybe. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the door that Jisoo had slammed shut 9 months ago, the one she had walked through with nothing but her dignity and her children in the rain, that door, she realized, had never actually locked. It had just been waiting for someone to prove they were worthy of knocking, and for the first time in 9 months, someone had. The night settled over the city like a held breath. Somewhere across town, in a mansion that felt like a tomb, Kang Ji-Zu sat at a desk covered in documents that could move markets and topple governments, and he ignored every single one of them. He was looking at his phone, at a photograph Min-ho had taken from a distance. 3 children playing in a small yard behind a bakery, their laughter visible even in a still image. 2 girls and a boy, Sua, Ivy, and Miles. His blood, his loss, his reason to become someone worth knowing. He set the phone down. He pressed his palms flat against the desk. And in the silence of an empire that suddenly meant nothing, the most feared man in Los Angeles whispered a word he hadn't spoken since the night he broke his own family. Dangsineil Jikilge. I will protect you. This time, he meant it differently. Not the protection of walls and guards and territory marked in blood. The quieter kind, the harder kind. The kind that starts with standing outside a door you slammed shut and proving day after day that you've changed the hands that closed it. Somewhere in Boyle Heights, Ivy stirred in her sleep and reached for the edge of Daniel's sleeve. Somewhere in a mansion on a hill, a man began the longest walk of his life. The one that leads not to power, but to the terrifying, fragile, impossible hope of being forgiven. And somewhere between the two, in the space where love and loss and second chances live, tangled together like roots beneath the earth, a story waited, not for an ending, for a beginning.